The expulsion notice glared from the screen, red letters searing into my retinas. My mother's trust fund, the one thing keeping me in school, was gone. Not lost, stolen. 3 days ago, my stepmother signed it away with a forged power of attorney. Now I'm cornered in my father's garage, gripping a torque wrench like a lifeline, while a debt collector's shadow stretches across the concrete. One wrong move, and the ledger in my pocket, the only proof I have, vanishes forever. The blue light of the laptop screen seared into Caleb's retinas, illuminating the bolded word, dismissed. He clicked through the university portal, fingers trembling against the grease-stained trackpad. The notification from the bursar's office sat like a lead weight in his inbox, citing a returned payment for the spring semester. He pulled up his banking app, the digits staring back at him, cold and unyielding. $14.32. The trust fund his mother spent 10 years building, the one meant to anchor his future, showed a balance of zero. A series of unauthorized transfers, all routed to an offshore holding company, had bled the account dry over the last 48 hours. The radiator in the corner of the dorm room hissed, spitting a metallic scent of rust and wet heat into the cramped space. Caleb's throat tightened. He gripped the edge of the particle board desk until the laminate bit into his palms. Outside in the hallway, a group of freshmen erupted in jagged laughter, their footsteps thumping rhythmically against the thin carpet. He reached for his phone, dialing his father's private line. It rang 3 times before cutting to a clipped, automated greeting. Caleb hung up without leaving a message. He shoved his feet into his sneakers, snagging his jacket from the bedpost. The zipper snagged twice before sliding shut. He needed the ledger in Robert's study. If his father had diverted the tuition money into another investment, the paper trail started at the house. He grabbed his keys, the brass cold against his skin, and bolted for the door. The drive from the campus to the suburbs was a blur of gray asphalt and the rhythmic thumping of wipers against a windshield that couldn't quite clear the morning mist. Caleb pulled his beat-up sedan into the driveway of the Miller estate, a sprawling colonial that looked more like a museum than a home. The air outside was damp, smelling of mulch and the expensive cedar shingles Robert insisted on replacing every 3 years. Caleb didn't knock. He used his key, the tumblers clicking with a heavy, expensive sound that usually signaled safety. But today felt like a trap. Inside, the house was silent, save for the low hum of the climate control. He moved toward the study, his sneakers silent on the plush Persian rugs. The door to Robert's office creaked, a tiny, sharp sound that set Caleb's teeth on edge. He began to tear through the mahogany desk, pulling out files and tossing aside glossy brochures for vacation homes. His hands moved with a frantic, mechanical precision. He wasn't looking for sentiment. He was looking for the numbers. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a sudden buzz that made him jump. It was Marcus. "Caleb, I'm looking at the digital trail now." Marcus's voice was a frantic whisper, the sound of a man hiding in a supply closet. The withdrawal wasn't an error. It was a manual request. Someone walked into the branch on High Street 3 days ago with a physical signature. The money is gone, man. It is not in the system anymore. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. 3 days ago, Robert was at a conference in Chicago. "I don't know what to tell you," Marcus said, the sound of a vending machine humming in the background of the call. But the person who signed for it had the master key to the account. This wasn't a hack. It was an execution. Caleb hung up, the silence of the room suddenly feeling heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. He turned his attention away from the desk and toward the built-in bookshelves. He remembered Robert mentioning a rainy day kit he kept in the garage, tucked away where Brenda wouldn't look. Caleb headed for the mudroom, the scent of expensive laundry detergent giving way to the cold, sharp smell of motor oil and concrete. The garage was a cavern of shadows. Robert's vintage Porsche sat under a silk tarp, a silver ghost in the corner. Caleb moved to the heavy steel toolbox bolted to the workbench. He fumbled with the latch, the cold metal biting into his fingertips. Beneath a tray of rusted sockets and oily rags, his hand hit something solid, a leather-bound accordion folder. He pulled it out, the crinkle snap of the plastic dividers echoing off the rafters. "You shouldn't be poking around in things that don't belong to you, kid." The voice was like gravel grinding together. Caleb spun around, the folder clutched to his chest. Standing in the doorway was a man he didn't recognize. Short, wiry, wearing a jacket zipped to his chin despite the humidity. He smelled of cheap vanilla cologne and stale cigarettes. This was the hammer Brenda had sent to make sure the nails stayed down. The man stepped forward, his boots clicking on the oil-stained floor. "I'm here to collect a debt. Your old man owes some people, and you're interfering with the repayment plan." Caleb didn't speak. He stepped back, his heel catching on a stray tire iron. The debt collector lunged, a blur of motion. Caleb swung the heavy torque wrench he'd been using to pry the toolbox. It connected with the man's shoulder with a sickening thud. The collector grunted, stumbling back against the hood of the Porsche. Caleb didn't wait for a second round. He bolted past the man, his lungs burning with the acrid scent of exhaust, and scrambled into his car. He floored it, the tires screaming against the driveway as he tore away from the house that was no longer his. He didn't stop until he reached a deserted parking lot behind a shuttered grocery store. The neon sign above flickered, casting a rhythmic, sickly green light over the dashboard. Caleb opened the folder. His eyes scanned the pages, skipping over the legal jargon and landing on the signatures. The ink was fresh, the loops of the letters sharp and aggressive. It wasn't Robert's shaky, hesitant script. It was Brenda's. She had used a forged power of attorney, a document that claimed Robert was mentally unfit to manage the trust. She hadn't just stolen the money. She had erased Caleb's claim to it with a single stroke of a pen. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. He leaned his head against the steering wheel, the horn giving a tiny, mournful beep. He was 22 years old, and the people who were supposed to be his floor had become his ceiling. He looked at the ledger again. There was a line item from 2 days ago. A down payment, $45,000. The recipient, Columbus Luxury Motors. Caleb drove to the house again, not with the stealth of a thief, but with the cold fury of a creditor. He parked on the street and walked up the lawn. There, sitting in the center of the circular driveway like a trophy, was a brand new Range Rover. The paint was a deep, metallic black that seemed to suck the light out of the air. It smelled of new leather and arrogance. He walked to the kitchen window. Through the glass, he saw Brenda. She was humming, a glass of white wine in one hand, while she poked at a salad. She looked peaceful. She looked like a woman who hadn't just set her stepson's future on fire. Caleb's phone chimed. An email from Jennifer Adams at the financial office. The subject line was in all caps, "Final notice." He opened it, his eyes blurring. Due to the returned payment, your enrollment for the spring semester will be terminated in 48 hours. All pending credits for Senior Design Project 402 will be forfeited. No extensions will be granted. Asterisk. The clock wasn't just ticking. It was screaming. He pushed through the front door, the heavy oak slamming against the wall. Brenda didn't even flinch. She just took a sip of her wine and turned around, a thin, predatory smile stretching across her face. "Caleb," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "You look like you've had a long day. Would you like some sparkling water? I just had the filter changed." "Where is he?" Caleb's voice was a low growl. "Your father is resting. He's had a very stressful week dealing with your academic instabilities." Caleb pushed past her, heading for the living room. Robert was sitting in his armchair, the one that faced the fireplace. He looked smaller than he had a month ago. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and his eyes were fixed on the cold ashes in the grate. "Dad," Caleb said, stepping into his line of sight. "She forged the papers. She took the tuition. Look at me." Robert didn't look. He adjusted his cufflink, his fingers trembling. "Steady as she goes, son," he whispered, the words an empty shell of a man who had long since given up. "Loose lips sink ships. We just need to weather the storm." "There is no storm, Robert. She's the one sinking the ship," Caleb shouted. He reached out to grab his father's shoulder, but a hand clamped onto his wrist like a vice. It was Travis, Brenda's brother. He was a wall of a man, his neck disappearing into his shoulders, smelling of old sweat and leather. He didn't say a word. He just squeezed until Caleb's bones felt like they were about to splinter. "I think it's time for you to leave, Caleb," Brenda said from the doorway, her voice cold and final. "You're trespassing. And we wouldn't want to have to call the authorities on a family member, would we?" Caleb backed away, his heart hammering. He needed leverage. He remembered his mother's jewelry box, the one kept in the wall safe behind the portrait in the master bedroom. It was the only thing Brenda hadn't been able to touch yet, because the code was his mother's birthday. If he could get those emeralds, he could hawk them, get the 12 grand, and save his degree. He waited until Travis went to the kitchen to consult with Brenda. Caleb slipped up the stairs, his feet light on the hardwood. He reached the master bedroom, the air smelling of Brenda's heavy, floral perfume. He swung the portrait aside. His fingers danced over the keypad. Click, click, click. The heavy steel door swung open, but the velvet-lined trays were empty. "Looking for these?" Travis was standing in the doorway. He held a small silk pouch in his hand, tossing it up and catching it. The emeralds inside made a soft, clinking sound. The sound of Caleb's last hope being turned into a toy. "Brenda thought you might try something desperate," Travis said. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. The space felt suddenly very small. Travis didn't waste time with words. He lunged. Caleb ducked under a massive fist, the wind of the punch whistling past his ear. He scrambled toward the bathroom, his mind racing through the floor plan. He knew this house. Travis was just a guest. Caleb grabbed a heavy glass vase from the vanity and shattered it against the doorframe, using the jagged base as a shield. "Stay back," Caleb warned, his voice cracking. Travis laughed, a dry, hacking sound. He pulled a black device from his belt, a stun gun. The air crackled with blue electricity, a sharp ozone smell filling the room. "I was a cop for 15 years, kid. You think a vase scares me?" Caleb didn't fight him head on. He backed into the walk-in closet, a sprawling room filled with Brenda's designer dresses. Travis followed, his eyes fixed on Caleb's throat. Just as Travis stepped over the threshold, Caleb dove between the hanging racks of silk and fur. He kicked a heavy shoe rack into Travis's shins, and as the big man stumbled, Caleb lunged for the door. He slammed the heavy, reinforced closet door shut and threw the deadbolt. Travis roared, the sound muffled by the thick wood. He began to pound on the door, thump, 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 his 4-count rhythm vibrating through the floorboards. Caleb didn't wait. He ran down the back stairs and out into the driveway. His eyes landed on the Range Rover. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the spare key he'd swiped from the kitchen counter during the argument. He climbed inside. The scent of new car was overwhelming. He opened the glove box, searching for anything. A registration, an insurance card. He found a folded piece of yellow carbon paper. It wasn't a standard sales contract. It was a private debt agreement. Brenda hadn't just bought a car. She had traded the tuition money to a local consultant to wash a gambling debt. The car was the collateral. Caleb felt a wave of nausea. His life had been traded for a hunk of metal and leather to keep a predator from Brenda's door. He started the engine. The roar of the V8 was a physical weight in the small driveway. Subverted beat 1.11. Caleb sat in the idling Range Rover, his hands gripping the heated steering wheel. This was it. He had the car, he had the evidence of the debt, and he had the forged power of attorney in his backpack. If he drove this car straight to a high-end wholesaler, he could have the cash by morning. He could walk into the bursar's office, throw the money on the desk, and finish his degree. He felt a surge of cold, calculated triumph. He was smarter than them. He was an engineer. He solved problems. He looked toward the front door of the house, expecting to see Brenda screaming. Instead, he saw his father. Robert was standing on the porch, holding a cordless phone to his ear. He wasn't looking at Caleb with anger. He was looking at him with a profound, hollow sadness. "Dad, don't do this," Caleb shouted through the window. "I'm saving myself. She's the one who stole from us." Robert didn't lower the phone. "Yes, officer." Robert's voice drifted across the lawn, amplified by the quiet evening air. "He's in the driveway now. He's stolen a vehicle and assaulted a guest in our home. He's dangerous. Please hurry." Caleb froze. His father had actually done it. Robert had chosen the lie over his own flesh and blood. The betrayal felt like a literal weight on Caleb's chest, making it hard to draw air. But then, he saw Brenda step out behind Robert. She placed a hand on Robert's shoulder, a gesture that looked like comfort, but was actually a leash. She leaned in and whispered something in his ear, and Robert nodded, his face a mask of defeat. "It's okay," Caleb thought, trying to steady his breathing. "The police will come. I'll show them the papers. I'll explain the forgery. The truth is on my side. I have the receipts. I have the folder." He felt a sense of righteous stability. American justice was built on the paper trail, and his was perfect. He stayed in the car, hands visible on the wheel, waiting for the flashing lights. He would be the adult here. He would let the system fix what his family had broken. The first cruiser pulled into the driveway, its sirens dying with a mournful wail. 2 officers stepped out, their hands hovering near their belts. "Step out of the vehicle, son," the older officer commanded. Caleb obeyed. He moved slowly, reaching for his backpack on the passenger seat. "Officer, I have the documentation right here. This car was purchased with stolen funds. My stepmother forged a power of attorney." "Save it for the station," the officer said, stepping forward. "No, you don't understand," Caleb said, his voice rising with a desperate edge of confidence. "Look at the signature on this ledger. I have the original trust documents from my mother's estate. I have the proof." He pulled the accordion folder from his bag. He opened it, ready to present Exhibit A. But as he pulled the paper out, he stopped. The ink was running. A bottle of industrial cleaner Brenda had accidentally left leaking in his backpack earlier, had soaked through the dividers. The forged signature was now a blue, illegible smear. The trust documents were a soggy gray pulp. The paper trail, his only shield, his only proof of existence, was dissolving in his hands. "He's reaching for something," Travis yelled from the porch, having somehow broken out of the closet. Caleb looked down at the ruined paper, then up at the officers. He saw the look in their eyes. They didn't see a student with a grievance. They saw a kid in a hoodie holding a mess of wet trash standing next to a stolen $60,000 car. The system didn't want the truth. It wanted the easiest solution. And the easiest solution was to put Caleb Miller in handcuffs. "Get on the ground, now." Caleb felt the cold gravel of the driveway against his cheek. The metal of the cuffs bit into his wrists, a sharp, biting cold that reminded him he was now a ward of the state. As they pushed him into the back of the cruiser, he looked back at the house. Brenda was smiling. She hadn't just stolen his money. She had stolen his voice. The night in the holding cell smelled of floor wax and unwashed bodies. Caleb sat on the metal bench, the rhythmic dripping of a leaky faucet down the hall, marking the seconds of his life slipping away. He had nothing left. No folder, no money, no family. The next morning, the cell door creaked open. It wasn't a lawyer. It was Marcus. "I can't stay long," Marcus whispered, leaning against the bars. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "I used my supervisor's login. Caleb, there's one more thing. Your mom, she knew Robert was weak. She took out a secondary life insurance policy, separate from the trust. It's sitting in an escrow account at the university's partner bank, $25,000. Caleb sat up, his joints aching. "How do I get it?" "That's the catch," Marcus said, his voice trembling. "It needs a parental signature to release to a minor beneficiary. And since the policy was never officially updated when you turned 18, the bank still flags it as requiring Robert's sign-off. If you get him to sign, the money hits your account instantly. You can pay the bursar and drop the charges." Caleb was released on a signature bond 2 hours later. Brenda had declined to press charges for the assault, likely realizing a public trial would bring too much scrutiny to her own finances. Caleb didn't go back to his dorm. He went straight to the house. He found Robert in the study, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. The room smelled of expensive scotch and cowardice. "Dad," Caleb said, his voice hoarse. "I need you to sign this. It's Mom's insurance. It's the only way I can stay in school." He placed the form on the desk. Robert looked at it, then at Caleb. His eyes were bloodshot. Brenda says you're trying to ruin us," Robert whispered. "She says you're the reason the creditors are calling." "She's lying, Dad. Look at the numbers." Robert stood up, his chair screeching against the hardwood. He didn't reach for a pen. He reached for the heavy brass fireplace poker. "You're just like your grandfather," Robert hissed, his face contorting into a mask of misplaced rage. "Always demanding more, always judging me." He swung the poker. It whistled through the air, clanging against the mahogany desk and sending a spray of splinters into the air. Caleb dove behind the leather sofa. "Dad, stop. You're drunk." "I'm the man of this house," Robert screamed, swinging again. He was clumsy, his movements heavy and telegraphed. He caught Caleb in the shoulder, a dull, thudding pain that made Caleb's vision swim. Caleb didn't retreat this time. As Robert raised the poker for a third strike, Caleb lunged forward, grabbing his father's wrists. They tumbled to the floor, a chaotic mess of limbs and gasping breaths. Caleb was younger, stronger. He twisted the poker out of Robert's grip and pinned the older man to the rug. Caleb looked down at his father. Robert was sobbing, a pathetic, broken sound that drained the anger right out of Caleb's body. He could hit him. He could break his nose, give him a taste of the pain he'd caused. But as Caleb looked at the man beneath him, he didn't see a villain. He saw a vacuum. Caleb let go. He stood up, breathing hard, and dropped the poker. It hit the floor with a dull clank. "I'm not you," Caleb said, his voice steady. "And I'm not Grandpa. I'm just done." He picked up the insurance form from the desk. It was wrinkled, but the signature line was still blank. He turned to leave, but Brenda was standing in the doorway. She was holding a piece of paper of her own. "You're too late, Caleb," she said, her voice dripping with a cruel, satisfied triumph. "I found that policy months ago. I filed a death certificate amendment with the state. I claimed the payout as his legal spouse while you were busy studying for your midterms. The money's gone. I spent the last of it on the Rover's insurance and a few personal debts." Caleb felt the world tilt. The last safety net had been shredded. He looked at the sirens flashing through the window. The police were back, likely called by Brenda the moment he stepped onto the property. Subverted beat 4.1. Caleb stood in the center of the study, the red and blue lights dancing across the walls like a fever dream. Brenda was leaning against the doorframe, her phone already out, ready to play the victim one last time. From the driveway, Chloe's voice drifted in. She was filming a TikTok, her ring light illuminating her face as she mocked Caleb's homeless era for her followers. "You have nothing," Brenda whispered. "No money, no proof, and in about 60 seconds, no freedom. Give me the keys to the Rover, Caleb. It's over." Caleb looked at her. Then he looked at the Range Rover through the window. Something clicked in his mind. Not a feeling, but a data point. He remembered the yellow carbon paper he'd found in the glove box. He remembered the VIN number, the vehicle identification number, printed at the top. It had been 17 digits, but the last 4 had been slightly misaligned, as if they'd been stamped on by a different machine. He didn't run. He didn't beg. He walked toward Brenda, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. "You're right," Caleb said, his voice unnervingly calm. "I don't have the money, but you don't have a car." Brenda scoffed. "It's sitting right there, you idiot." "No," Caleb said, leaning in close. "A 2024 Range Rover with a tampered VIN is a federal felony. I'm an engineer, Brenda. I know how metal is stamped. The car you bought from your consultant is a re-VIN, a stolen vehicle with a fake identity. And since you signed the registration in your name, using stolen trust funds as the down payment, well, that's money laundering and interstate auto theft." Brenda's face went pale. The predatory smile vanished, replaced by a twitch at the corner of her mouth. "You're bluffing." "The cops are in the driveway, Brenda," Caleb said, pointing to the window. "I can go out there and tell them I'm a disgruntled son, or I can go out there and ask them to run a chemical etch test on the Rover's frame. If I'm right, you're looking at 10 to 15 years. If I'm wrong, well, I'm already going to jail anyway. What do I have to lose?" He held out his hand. "Sign the title over to me. Now, as a gift to settle the trust dispute. I'll drive it off the property, sell it to a wholesaler who doesn't ask questions, and you'll never see me again. You keep the house, you keep Robert, and you keep your freedom. For now." Brenda stared at him, her chest heaving. She looked at the police officers walking up the path, then back at Caleb. Her hand shook as she reached into her bag and pulled out the title. She scribbled her name on the back, the ink jagged and ugly. "Get out," she hissed. "Get out and never come back." Caleb took the paper. He walked out the front door, past the confused officers, and climbed into the Rover. He didn't look back at the house. He didn't look at Chloe. He drove. He stopped at a wholesale lot on the edge of the city, a place where the air smelled of burnt oil and desperation. The owner, a man with grease-stained fingers and a cynical eye, looked at the title, then at the car. "I can give you 18 grand, the man said, spitting a glob of tobacco onto the gravel. "Cash. No paperwork beyond the bill of sale." "Done," Caleb said. He walked away from the lot with a thick envelope of $100 bills tucked into his jacket. He took a bus back to the university. He walked into the bursar's office 20 minutes before they closed. Jennifer Adams looked up from her desk, the low hum of her funeral dirge already vibrating in the air. "Caleb, I'm sorry, but the deadline..." Caleb placed the stack of cash on her desk. Thump. $12,000 for the tuition, he said, his voice flat. "The rest is for the late fees. I'd like a printed receipt. Now." 3 months later, Caleb sat in the back of the university library. The air was cool, smelling of old paper and silence. In front of him sat a small velvet box. Inside was his mother's engineering ring, the one piece of jewelry Brenda hadn't found because he'd hidden it in his old Lego bin years ago. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. "Caleb, it's Robert. Things are difficult. Brenda left. The bank is foreclosing on the house. I'm staying at a motel. I just need a few hundred to get through the month. A miller never retreats, right? Please, son." Caleb looked at the message. He thought about the cold gravel of the driveway. He thought about the smell of the holding cell. He thought about the way his father had looked at the fireplace ashes while his son's life was being dismantled. He didn't type a reply. He opened a browser tab, searched for a warehouse job listing in North Columbus, and copied the link. He pasted it into the message box, hit send, and then blocked the number. He picked up his diploma, a crisp, white piece of paper that felt heavier than any ledger. He slid his mother's ring onto his finger, the gold cool against his skin. He stood up and walked out of the library, stepping into the bright, late afternoon sun. The air was clear. The path was wide. And for the first time in his life, Caleb Miller didn't need a receipt to know exactly who he was.